Hey, Carrie, how you doing?
Good, Eric. How are you?
Good. We're straddling the country right now. I'm in California. Carrie is in Florida, so we have the whole thing covered.
Absolutely.
She's in the heat, in the summer heat in Florida, and I'm in a cool 72 degrees here in California. So I'm going to brag about that for the moment because I'm jealous that you have much lower state taxes than we do.
Oh, good. Fair enough. Although I might trade you for just a moment with the heat that we have right now and all the rain and the just humidity. It's amazing.
You're perfectly free to jump on a plane and come over here and enjoy the nice cool weather. So I was telling Carrie before we started the episode that I'm from Dallas originally, lived there for the first 20 years of my life. And then the last 27 of my life, I've been in Southern California. I remember the heat, and I remember that those who could basically left town during the summer, from, call it maybe July and August, or maybe June through July, whatever somebody could do. If they could, they left town. And typically they go to places like Colorado or Santa Barbara. Usually the retirees who have saved up enough money to be able to do that. But that's what people did then.
Yep, absolutely. If I could do that right now, I probably would.
Yeah, of course. The rest of us have to work. So
Yeah.
we're going to focus on that. Okay. Carrie, you are a Tampa, Florida hairdresser who focuses on cutting. So your Instagram is chock full of clips that are very educational all around cutting, and I found myself enthralled scrolling through your profile there, and so I highly recommend to our listeners to go on your Instagram. You are also a member of the Paul Mitchell Advanced Education team, and something very interesting that I found while researching you, you're an advocate for industry integrity, which I just love the sound of it. But why don't we start with that one? What does that mean to be advocating for
Perfect.
industry integrity?
Oh, where to begin? So I'll start by saying that I've had pretty good salon experience in my life. I haven't had like horror story experiences, which I know many people have. But I've also just been an educator for, 15 years now. And so watching new students come into school and learn how to do hair, and then watching their process of them going in to interview salons and seeing the things that they see, and then coming to me with questions about interviews that they've had and experiences that they've had in salons, it really has gotten my wheels turning, right? So as I've started to do research in the industry, and as I am moving along my journey of actually looking to open a salon here very shortly, I started to think, when I offer a salon space to new stylists, like what do I want them to feel? How do I want them to think about myself as an owner and about the brand that I'm creating? And I want to make sure that whatever I provide is somewhere that is ethical. I want to follow laws. I want to make sure that stylists aren't being cheated and that I'm not, evading taxes like so many salons these days are, which is the crazy dark side of the industry, right? So I really just try to stand up for what's right. I've always had a strong moral compass, I guess you could say. So I try to live with integrity in everything that I do. And I just think that we need more of that in the industry.
Very interesting. And I'm on the same page, certainly. 23 years in the industry, and we've gotten to the point at Salon Republic where we're at a size where we have to. I mean, even if I didn't want to, we would have to. I've always wanted to, though. But why don't you tell us what specifically you mentioned tax avoiding and making sure that you're following the laws. How are people primarily avoiding taxes these days, according to what you're seeing?
Yeah. So, I'm obviously in a lot of hair groups, private Facebook groups and stylist groups and salon owner groups. And I read so many comments, and honestly, I kind of see a lot of horror stories from hairstylists that say things like, I've been in this salon and I'm getting a commission, or they're paying me hourly, and then I'm given a 1099, and I just don't quite know what's right and what's wrong, and they really have no idea. So I see that aspect of it. I also see a lot of stylists who say, I'm renting a booth, and yet my salon owner is telling me that I can't work on Saturdays because of whatever reason, or that I have to follow this really strict dress code and attend monthly mandatory trainings that are unpaid. So, throughout all of my 15 years, I've seen all of this happen, and I've known stylists who have signed non-compete clauses with salons. And these are stylists who are fresh out of school that don't know what they don't know, right? They're so naive about the industry. They don't know where they should be. They don't even know what a non-compete clause is. And so with all of that, it just stacks up, right? And so over the years, I've started to think to myself, like, wow, I have this platform now. And I have gained a lot of followers. That was never my intention on social media. But now that I do have a good amount of followers, I feel like it's almost an ethical obligation to speak out and say, like, these are the things that we should be seeing change in the industry.
Yeah. Amen.
So, yeah.
Okay. So, but you mentioned something in there that I haven't spoken a whole lot about on the podcast, just because we haven't really made it to that topic, but that's the topic of non-competes. And I know that this has been a very popular topic, not just in our industry, but across the employment landscape broadly. In California, most of the topic centers around the high-tech workers, and California treats non-competes in a particular way, primarily in a way that doesn't recognize them very strongly. And just to keep going here, just to provide a little foundation of knowledge for the listeners, to give you an example of why a company would have a non-compete in the high-tech industry, let's say somebody goes to work for Apple, right? And they're working in the kind of creative design department, and they're working on the iPhone 16 or whatever. And that worker is exposed to a lot of trade secrets and things that are highly valuable to Apple. And of course, that worker is an at-will employee, meaning he or she can leave whenever they want. So let's say they leave after gaining all of this exposure and knowledge, and then they can just go work for the competitor with all this knowledge that they just gained, which is quote unquote secret, confidential, from Apple. And so that's why a lot of these companies have non-competes. But like I said, the state of California has developed kind of a precedent of not recognizing them very much. It's not that they don't recognize them at all. It's just really hard for a company like Apple to enforce them. And then let's bridge the gap to our industry. I know that in the Northeast, particularly Manhattan, and maybe this is what you're talking about, Carrie, a lot of salons have started to try to use non-competes to make it hard for a hairstylist to go work at the salon, to, I guess, theoretically, conceptually gain a clientele. I guess that the salon assumes that all of the clientele is being provided by the salon, and then the hairstylist develops a relationship with the clients, and then the hairstylist leaves and takes the clientele, and the salon doesn't want that to happen. So they think that they can mitigate this with a non-compete. Okay, so that was kind of me giving a foundation. So was I
Yes.
accurate? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, I think primarily that it from my experience, I think that it started with commission salons, which I'm for commission salons if done the right way. But I think that primarily it started with commission salons, and the salons would put so much energy and, yes, value and money into new stylists fresh out of hair school, and they felt like, I made you, and I created you, and these guests that I gave you are ours, And so I understand that it came from that feeling that, man, I keep losing stylists. I put all this investment into them, and there's such a turnover, and salons just are like running and not getting anywhere because of that. And I feel like that's really where those non-competes came from, was in an attempt to try and keep that value there.
Yeah. And of course, this is not unique to our industry. This happens in every industry. How many friends that I have who are in the pharmaceuticals, the pharma rep business, and the pharma company would send off my friend, the new employee, to the pharma company to training for like 6 weeks. I mean, how much money does that cost them? Cost them millions of dollars. They send off their new employees to train for 6 weeks. And then the people can leave after 3 months, 4 months, go get a job at another company who doesn't have to do all that training. And of course, the employee is more valuable to the new company because they are trained. They have a basis of knowledge. So it's not just in our industry. I know I always get the sense that everybody thinks that our industry is so unique. And the fact that, in that regard or in turnover regard, turnover is about a third per year, so about 33% supposedly. Nobody knows exactly, but this is kind of what's thrown out there. About 33% of beauty professionals leave their salons every year. Well, guess what? Turnover in the American workforce is about 33%. So there's nothing unique about it. Okay, well, where do you come down on the non-compete? Do you think it's fair or not fair?
So I guess where I come to it is that I understand it. And I think that there's a time and a place, right? I think Apple is a huge corporation, and someone who is maybe an executive with a large corporation coming into that role, they know what they're getting into. They know what they know, right? But I think the lower levels, lower paying jobs, if somebody is working at a grocery store, for instance, no, they shouldn't have to sign a non-compete because you're at a much lower level and you're just trying to build, right? And I see the same thing happening with beauty school students, so the students that I have that I adore so much, and I get really excited for them to go out and take their first steps into their career. And when I hear that they go into a salon and that the salon showers them with what could be and all of the amazing sparkles and rainbows, and we offer education and we have this and we have that and look how beautiful the place is, but we just need you to sign this piece of paper, right? That's kind of what I don't agree with necessarily. So in my mind, if a salon is going to have a new stylist sign a non-compete, I think the best way to do it, besides not doing it and just providing a really amazing space that people want to stay in, I think the better way to do it would just be to say, hey, come in and spend 6 months with us. And if we mutually are enjoying each other, then we can talk about signing a non-compete. But I've just seen too many stylists that are new get locked into something, and it creates such an atmosphere of animosity. And then when you have that one stylist that isn't happy, we know what happens, right? All the stylists around them almost just kind of get infected. And then aside from that too, a non-compete, although I understand the reason for it, I feel like it's just a way to have a threat, to threaten stylists and say, well, if you don't like it, too bad, you signed a form. But for me, moving into salon ownership and looking to open up a salon, I would never want a stylist to stay in my salon out of fear, or out of the fact that they are stuck for 2 years. No, if you want to move on, move on. And then I would want to look at myself as the owner and say, why am I having so many people move on? What can I do differently as an owner?
Sure.
That's kind of where I stand.
In other words, you have people working there at will, at their own will, naturally, versus having it compulsory with this legal threat. And I totally agree. Yeah. But as you're talking and I'm listening, I imagine the listeners might also wonder what exact threat there is with a non-compete that a salon might give a hairstylist. So help me connect the dots. If a hairstylist signs a non-compete and then she leaves, What exactly is she prevented from doing legally? Prevented from working in another salon? Prevented from doing one of the clients that supposedly is owned, quote unquote, air quotes? What happens?
So it could be a few different things, really depending how the non-compete is written. In general, it's going to be preventing a stylist from going to work in a specific geographical mile range, right? So let's say that stylist goes to work in a salon, they have a really awful experience and they want to leave, but perhaps they've signed a non-compete that says they can't work anywhere within 20 miles of that specific salon. So that would prevent that hairstylist, even if they just graduated from school 6 months out and now they're stuck. They have to drive depending on where they live in traffic. Maybe they're driving an hour, to another city. Maybe if they're in an area that is, like Tampa, where I'm at, we're super competitive, meaning that we just have a lot of salons. I mean, we have a salon and barbershop and nail salon in just about every single plaza of every street, major, street. So that would prevent the stylist from going to any of those salons. So geographical, it could also prevent a stylist. Let's say that a salon invests money in a stylist and they send them to training on maybe hair extension techniques or something like that. If that was paid for through that specific salon, it could prevent them from taking that knowledge and education that they received at their salon and then going and using those same techniques at another salon. So there's a few different ways that it can be worked.
Wow. I don't think that is legal. Has that been held up in court? I would be really surprised.
Yeah, I've done some research. I have a few friends who have been sued, or they have had the threat of being sued. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know the details of all of them, but I do know that it creates a lot of stress for them. I've heard that, non-competes don't hold up in court, but then I've had other individuals that say, yeah, they do, and they've gotten a few people. But I just think it just creates it puts a bad taste. It leaves a really bad taste in the mouths of individuals who are newer to the industry. And I think that's where the key is. Now, if somebody's been in the industry for 20 years, and they have this huge clientele and this huge book, they know what they're in for. Maybe they go into a salon and they feel like, okay, I am going to sign a non-compete because I know what to look for. I can do the research. I know that these salons are following the legalities of the laws and, taxes and all of that stuff. But my biggest concern are those newer.
But even the older hairstylists with a big book of business, big book of clients, they would be insane to sign a non-compete. They're essentially transferring the value of their business. If they have a nice book of business in a good area like Tampa, that's probably worth well over $100,000 a year in revenue. They're essentially transferring that value to the salon. That would be utterly insane.
Absolutely. But at least they would know. At least they have an understanding of the industry. But I agree. Yeah.
So, the advice to the listeners, if you need more information than this, is to talk to a labor attorney. Yeah. And typically you can talk to a labor attorney for, a free consultation. Typically they'll give you a free consultation. For a labor attorney, I don't think it's that complicated of a description, and it probably won't take them any more than 15 or 30 minutes to give you some really quick advice. Another source of information oftentimes is the Professional Beauty Federation, which I'm the chair of. And the guy who is the workhorse of our organization is Fred Jones, and our listeners know Fred. He's an attorney. He's a lobbyist. He knows everything about this industry going back 20 plus years. And Fred gives a lot of free advice on this kind of stuff. So you could always go to the website and email him. The website is beautyfederation.org. And we've done, on the Hair Game podcast, going back the last several years, we've done a few on employment law, because especially in California, we have so many beauty professionals and the employment laws have been changing here and tightening up, making it more difficult for a salon to try to be another air quotes here, hybrid, When people say we're a hybrid salon, it's illegal to be a hybrid salon. You either have to have
Correct.
your service providers as employees or not employees as independent business people. And this is another misnomer. They're not even independent contractors. They are independent business people in most cases. And you can't really blend those in a place like California. I can't speak clearly about other states, but it seems like most states are trying to define more clearly the difference between employees versus non-employees.
Yeah, and I think it's so hard too. I mean, even myself, I started doing research on this probably last year is when I really was like, man, I need to learn more about this, because that's where I really started thinking, it's time to open a salon. It's been 15 years. Let's do this. But I was like, I need to get smarter about this side of the industry. And it's hard. There's so much misinformation out there. And you really do have to peel through the pages on the Department of Labor, on irs.gov to really find the details. I actually started following the Sovereign Stylist and Leanne Miley. And that's where I actually found some good information and started to find the right path. But it's a lot. It's a lot. So for newer stylists, and also these things aren't taught in schools. We kind of brush over the information, but to talk about taxes, I mean, I'm even hesitant as an educator. I'm like, ooh, I don't want to say the wrong thing and get sued,
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're not taught in beauty school. They're taught in law school, which is why there's so many lawyers. And so typically, you can do it the way that you talked about it. You can go to the department of this and that and learn, you can dig through the information, or you can call an attorney and pay the attorney. And, they will give you bespoke advice according to your exact needs. But yeah, it can be very, very complicated. And I remember having a headache after some of the episodes where I had an employment attorney on, and we talked about the details. And of course, at the end, I'm like scrambled eggs for brains. But hopefully the listeners got something from that. So sometimes good to get that advice for your specific issue, because otherwise you go down these roads that are irrelevant to your particular situation, and you end up learning about something that's not going to help you out. Yeah. Okay, so you work full time at the Paul Mitchell School in Tampa, is that right?
I do. That's correct.
Well, let's talk about the state of cosmetology school these days. There's always something happening, something to talk about. And I know now there's, some threats to kind of the system and all that. So why don't we just, I'll just throw it out to you. What is the state of cosmetology school these days?
I think cosmetology schools are definitely in a position of being a little worried. We know we have deregulation is a real thing, so we're hearing a lot of talk about that.
And hold on,
I tend to not live.
The deregulation means simply doing away with or diminishing the value of or diminishing the requirement of a license, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're seeing that. We're seeing at many schools hours are being lowered. So here in the state of Florida, for instance, cosmetologists have always been 1,200 hours. Barber, for a full barber's license that also learns chemicals, has been 1,200. Those hours were just lowered to 900 for barbers. And I know, many states are dropping hours to 1,000 hours for cosmetology. So, we're seeing that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so what is your opinion on that, the lowering of the hours?
Yeah. I think that I don't mind a small lowering of the hours. I do think there needs to be more consistency across the board, right? So I think that to have, hair beauty school students, whatever you want to call them, to go to one state, I think New York has always been 1,000 hours, but then if they transfer and they move to another state, they have to go back to school and up to 1,600 hours. So I do understand, and I feel that there needs to be something that's a little bit more standard across the board. And I think that 1,000 hours is a sweet spot. I think that it's quick, it's efficient. There's not a lot of playtime there. I do feel that it's just enough time to get the foundations and schooling that is needed without a lot of extra. But students are absolutely not going to be mastering any skills or, coming out of school as specialists in any specific category because there is so much to pack in.
Yeah. So I want to say, was it Minnesota? I did an episode on this also a few years ago. There were a couple states that were over 2,000 hours. I don't know if they're still over 2,000 hours, but there's a couple states that are over 2,000 hours. And I remember asking my guest, is the hair in Minnesota markedly better than the hair in New York? Because New York was like 1,000 hours, like you said. But as you indicated, the hours have been coming down. California went from, I believe, is 1,600 to 1,000, and we did away with the practical exam, right? And the Cosmetology Board of California, I've known the lady running that for many years, and it's the Department of Consumer Affairs that runs that board. That controls the number of hours, and they're very forthright with their mission, not to make sure that everyone has good hair who's coming out of a licensed salon, but to make sure that that all of the consumers are safe coming out of a salon. So that's kind of where a lot of people get confused when they think about what's the purpose of a license. If you talk to most of the organizations that are in charge of it, of upholding a license or controlling a license or imposing a license, most of them will tell you that it has to do with safety, not in the technical skill set of the beauty professional. Correct.
Yeah. And Florida, actually, we've never had a practical. So that's when I hear of states that have practicals, I think to myself, like, are those stylists that much more knowledgeable about hair and sanitation and safety? I don't know. Or is it just something that you practice to take that practical and you get it out of the way and then you never do that again? I don't know what it's like to be in a state that has that.
Probably the latter, I would guess. And because if it's about technical skill, how subjective is that? And how do you even do that? And I did not get a cosmetology license, so I can't tell you what my experience was. But it seems kind of rife with inconsistencies and unfairness, really. But okay, so what are you seeing in terms of the flow of students coming in? More, less? Since COVID, any changes?
So I remember back, during the recession, the first recession, we had a huge influx of students because nobody had jobs. Everybody was, and I think just technical schools across the board saw an influx because people were like, what am I going to do with my life? This is a perfect time to change jobs. Tuition rates were also a little bit more affordable then, but so was the cost of living, so everything was more affordable. And then with COVID, it was very interesting because I can't remember what our student body count was at the time, but our students were given the opportunity when we had to shut down for COVID, and they were given the opportunity to take a pause on their education and then come back when we figured everything out. But the large majority of them said, no, we want to keep going to school. We want to stay on this path, right? So we continued with enrollment. And unfortunately, the state of Florida didn't allow us to give any practical skill, service credit for anything. So it was strictly theory. I went virtual after a day of learning how to operate a Google Classroom, like so many. And then when we reopened, the class that I started right after COVID was, I want to say 31 people. It was a huge class because so many people were just waiting and they couldn't wait to get back to normalcy. So we were doing mass checks and the temperature checks and all of that, but we had huge enrollment. And then everything kind of leveled out, but I think that right now employment has a lot to do with it. People have jobs, the employment rate is doing pretty well. So there aren't a lot of people saying, hey, I think I want to go back to school. And I do think that a lot of cosmetology schools opened up, but so did a lot of salons. And so there's so much competition there. So it's an interesting place that we're in. I wish I had the answer of like, where are the schools going and where's the industry going in salons? But I guess all we can do is just make educated guesses.
Right, right. That's one of the things about our industry that's kind of interesting and frustrating for some people who try to get a macro look. Is there's our associations are relatively weak, and there's not a whole lot of money to be made from aggregating a bunch of information, so nobody does it. So it's hard to find attrition rates out of schools and graduation rates across the board.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that it's separated by state makes it difficult. But so we can only get little anecdotal things that people see, like Carrie Smith coming on here and saying this is what's happening in our school. So, that's the best that we can do. What about graduation rates? Are people graduating? I mean, you're at a very high-end school. Paul Mitchell School's an expensive school that is teaching stuff that is probably well beyond what is, air quotes, necessary to get a license. So maybe it's a little bit different for you guys, but how are graduation rates and rates?
Yeah. I can't quote the exact number off the top of my head. It lives in our catalog on our website. But graduation rates for us has always been pretty high. Graduation, placement, we always do really, really well. But like you said, our students are coming out way more knowledgeable. And I think that is it differs from school to school. Our school has always had really strong educators, a really strong team. We have a really strong leadership team and owners and directors. And I think that matters. That plays a huge role.
Talk about placement after graduation. How is it working these days?
Yeah. So within the school, we have obviously guest artists. So we invite salons in, salon owners, business professionals in. So that's probably the main way that our students are able to meet and greet and really get a feel for salons that they want to work at. And then we also have career fairs, multiples throughout the year. So we're very much connected to all of the local salons. I think the hard part is that you have the loud salons, right? You have the 5 or 10 top salons that are like, we're always hiring because we always have the space and we're always looking for new assistants to move into our assistant program or whatever they want to call it. So they're the ones that make the most noise. The challenge comes from the future professionals or students getting ready to graduate and then saying, I don't know where I want to go work because I only remember these 5 or 10 main names, and I have to explain to them like, look, there are hundreds of salons that aren't loud. So that's where it can be a little bit tricky, and getting those salons to want to come into the schools. Many salons aren't doing that anymore because they need ready-made stylists that have a book because they can't afford to pay an assistant or to pay someone to build their book. And that's the tough part.
Or train.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Very interesting. So do you, how does it work? Does the staff at the school have a database of the salons and maybe categorize them by type or culture or things like that?
Yeah. So there's definitely, we do have a database. We have a email list. We have a big binder. So our students, when they get close to graduating, they go through a process. Part of their graduation requirements is that they have to actually go into salons. They have to do salon visits. They have to come back and tell us, what did you learn? What did you hear about? And so we do try to get them, encourage them to go ask the right questions, right? They even have pre-made forms that helps them to gather information like, what is the pay scale and what is my career journey look like, and how many chairs do you have, and what services do you offer? So we really do, I think, try our best. All of the Paul Mitchell schools try hard to set them up for success. But the one thing that I wish we had, and I know this will never happen, but you can always wish. I wish there was almost a not a flow chart, that's not the right word for it, but a chart that would say, which salons are booth rental, which salons are employment based, which salons, have a non-compete, which salons offer education, which salons. So I almost wish that we had something like that to make it easier. I recently taught a class last week, professional development class for our student body, and I talked about just the different salon types, like a traditional salon versus a more boutique salon versus a booth rental and a home salon. And they just had no idea, and so at the end they were like, well, these salons have come into the school, but I don't even know what kind of salon they have,
Right.
and so trying to encourage them to just, it's tough.
Go out there and do the work, right? Because it's
hit the pavement.
Go hit the pavement. Because even if Paul Mitchell School or all the Paul Mitchell schools, let's say in Florida, are working off of a database of salons categorized by zip code, categorized by type, a lot of that information can change. I mean, a salon can go from booth rental to commission or commission to booth rental, and a non-compete to non-compete. And you'd need a staff of Paul Mitchell schools would need a staff of several people full time just to keep that current, and that's kind of unreasonable. So it's gonna fall upon the graduate to really put the work in, that's part of life.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. That's what they ask me all the time. How do I find out? And I'm like, go knock on the door. Just go knock on their door. I'm sure it's a small business. These aren't big corporations.
That's right. Another threat to cosmetology schools that I think I alluded to early on is some legislation that is making its way through the federal government related to for-profit schools and how the financial aid treats them. The financial aid as provided by the feds, and whether there's financial aid and how it's doled out, and so on and so forth. Are you familiar with that?
I'm a little bit familiar. I've listened to a few podcasts and read a little bit, not enough to dive deep, but I'm familiar. Yeah.
So the bottom line is the feds are highly suspicious of for-profit schools, and it's not necessarily the cosmetology schools that are kind of piquing their concern. Oftentimes it's these, I don't know, like maybe a DeVry type operation. I don't even know if DeVry is still around anymore. I might be dating myself, but those kind of for-profit colleges that offer these degrees, and some of them have been found to be fraudulent, over the last couple decades, and they leave students saddled with all this debt and a diploma that is worthless, if not actually a negative to have. I went to DeVry, and that actually makes me look worse that I went to DeVry, but yet I have $50,000 of debt because I went to DeVry. So the feds have been trying to tighten up this thing, and the beauty schools are getting wrapped up into it, unfortunately. So I know Fred Jones from Professional Beauty Federation is doing a lot of good work on this, and I'm going to interview him so he can give us a little bit more information. There are things that our industry can do to try to inform the feds that our industry is a little bit different than these other for-profit schools, and I'm going to talk about that on that episode. But I just thought that I would mention it because if the flow of money, the student loan money dries up, then it's going to be hard for a lot of beauty schools to attract students.
Yeah, very hard. And I think that's what's so tricky is that, the for-profit schools are, hands down offering a better education. There's no doubt about that, I would say. I have a niece who's going to a community college. I won't say where, but, I asked her recently, like, oh, how's it going? And just random questions. And she's like, oh, pretty good, And I said, are you getting to work on different textures and curl patterns, And she's like, oh, well, we worked on one curly doll, or we have a curly doll, but they're not really doing anything with it, And so I I've heard that so just time and time and time again, you know.
Sure.
So there's no doubt that there are many schools out there that I think need like a good kick in the pants. You know, they've gotten away for far too long with just not doing what they should be doing.
Sure.
So I understand it, but
right.
It's unfortunate for other reasons.
Sure. I mean, it makes sense that the state or county or federal government is not in the business of offering cosmetology education, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some community colleges that have these classes, but not surprising that they're not going to be top quality, you know, and this goes into the morass of what do we think a government is for. And I think a lot of people
Correct.
would probably agree that general education, you know, the government, it's good for the government to be involved with offering general education through the public school system. But when it comes to something like, you know, being something specific, like a specific trade like cosmetology, I'm not really sure it's the role of the government to provide a really high quality cosmetology program. And that's why we have for-profit cosmetology programs. And then, of course, those can compete on the basis of quality and value and how much they're charging and what they're delivering, which is what we have today. But that system is financed, unfortunately or fortunately, oftentimes from government-provided financial aid. And that's why this new legislation is pretty important.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, you know, if community college and government-funded colleges could reach the level of education, that would be a great thing. I would be grateful for that. But unfortunately, that's not where we're at. So those for-profit schools they still need to exist for that reason.
Yep. Because if the government is to take on beauty school education for free, is it also taking on teaching accountants how, you know, is it teaching trade schools like plumbers? You know, is it going to have the best, you know, plumbing school and that's going to be free for anyone who wants to be a plumber? Or, you know, go down the line for trade schools? I think it's just beyond the scope. I would think, you know, my perspective, just thinking about this on the fly, is probably, you know, outside of the scope of what a government is supposed to provide in terms of education. So I think we're always going to have for-profit a school for cosmetology. Okay, so I think we've tackled that topic. Let's go to your experience as an educator. You are a cutting specialist, and you've done a lot of cutting education for people. I assume you've done a lot of obviously you do pre-license education. Have you also done a lot of post-license education for cutting?
Not so much. Most of what I've done has been in Paul Mitchell schools and through PMAE. So I started with Paul Mitchell schools back in 2008. 8, 9, I want to say. And, you know, through that time, I taught just about everything, cutting and color and texture and styling and all of the above. Cutting has been something that I have just found such a passion in the last few years. That passion came from actually developing some allergies and working behind the chair and working with hair color and constantly being exposed. So I just was sort of taken into that path, not realizing that it was going to be something that I enjoyed and loved so much. It's funny because I tell everyone cutting was not my strength. It was my weakest area. It scared the, you know, living crap out of me. But I decided to just attack it. I was like, what am I weakest in and what is not a chemical? Hair cutting. So I went to my director at the time at the school and I said, hey, I think I really want to take on cutting. I'd love to be a cutting specialist. So I started pushing myself, and that's where it started.
I love it. And I love it really quick. Let me just interject because that belies a lot of the popular notions these days, especially on like the little clips on Instagram. And you got some guy who goes on there or some lady who like says one little quip and it's like sounds so profound, and you feel as a viewer of this, you're like, yes, I should 100% go in that direction. And people will say things like, you know, really lean into your strengths and ignore your weaknesses. And I'm always like, gosh, well, what if this skill that you're weak in is really important?
Yeah.
Ignoring it could be very costly. I always think this. And so I think it's absolutely possible, just like you are an example of, identifying a weakness that is important. In your case, it was because you had a physical reaction to all the other stuff, like the chemicals. You can absolutely remedy a weakness.
100%. I think sometimes our weakness comes from avoidance, right? You do something one time in school and you're like, oh my God, that was the hardest thing ever. Finger waves, or whatever, that one triangular bob, and it just scares the living crap out of you. And then you avoid it and you decide that you hate it. But, hate comes from fear and not knowing. And so, yeah, I say attack your weaknesses and go for it, because you never know. You never know what you're going to fall in love with.
Absolutely. All right. So tell us, with the new students that you have and the soon to be graduating students and everything in between, what is like one or two things that you consistently teach that gets kind of an aha reaction?
Oh, goodness. Probably haircutting in general. In the world of haircutting, I would just say the fundamentals. When I first started cutting hair and going through school, Paul Mitchell has a great cutting system, right? And so I learned through a great system, but I didn't really understand why I was doing what I was doing. In the beginning, I thought that every single blunt one length was just a square bob, and I thought that every graduation was that stacked bob, and I thought that every layer was a round layer with face framing. So my students tend to have aha moments when I show them things that are outside of what is printed in the system, to get different or sometimes the same result. So what we say is that we're trying to teach them how to cut hair, not how to do a haircut. We're not trying to teach people how to replicate the same haircut on every single person. No, let's talk about cause and effect, and how when we elevate to this degree and it falls, this is what we get. Or we change our sectioning of a layer. You can cut a layer with vertical, but you can also cut a layer horizontally, right? Because elevation is what makes the layer, not the section angle. That just supports us. So that tends to be where my biggest ahas are. And then I would say the other areas would probably be in chemistry. I still love color. I still teach color chemistry. So those are the other big ahas. Even for a licensed stylist, when I'm teaching other teachers, because I do teach for Paul Mitchell's advanced education team. So I just did a virtual training recently with a couple of other educators, and we taught 60 educators at Paul Mitchell schools all around the nation,
Wow.
and even seeing their ahas talking about chemistry or makeup of hair. It's incredible to me.
It seems like with the technical skills in our industry, in this craft, that there's never really a point at which you know everything, right? I mean,
No.
as
Oh,
much as
God.
I talk to everybody, the highest level of people in our industry, consistently the one message is they admit to not knowing everything. They admit to
Yes.
continually learning. And that's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the hair color world, I love it. I can't even wrap my head around it, because there's something new every single day. I was taught back in the day that blue lighteners don't tone hair. And then I hear that there are brands that have technology. Their lightener tones the hair. And I'm like, what the heck? So I just always try to remember, don't ever say I know until you do the research, and just be open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you could wave a wand and change anything about the industry right now, what would it be?
Oh, man. If I could wave a wand and change anything in the industry, I think it would be that stylists put more value on themselves. And I don't mean that in a sense of that they think that they should be worth more money, but I think that we should have more respect for ourselves. I oftentimes see stylists that just the way that they talk and the way that they carry themselves, you can tell that they still feel like in this industry, sometimes we are lesser than other industries, and that's not true. And I know there are many stylists who have changed the game, right? This industry is more lucrative than it ever has been, and there is more respect being placed on stylists than ever before. But I still think that there's that mentality still with individuals or with students or with their families that say, well, you couldn't hack it at a real job, so you just became a hairdresser. That has to change. We have to value ourselves. We have to see ourselves as professional individuals. So
would you say that that's improved over the last? You said you've been in the industry about 15 or so years or whatever.
15.
Yeah. Would you say that? Well, actually, I mean, even you could go back in your memory before that. Would you say over the last, let's call it 15 or 20 years, that's gotten better or worse?
Yeah. I do think it's gotten better. And I think it's gotten better through education, through stylists, making that jump to get more education so that they could charge more. And through that, they feel more valuable. But I still just see it, and it's still, and for me, I'm so inundated within the school system, so I tend to see those new stylists, and I wish that I could tell them like how valuable they are and how they're just as important as anyone else going to any other school. If you want to go be a lawyer, that's great. Doesn't make you better than a hairstylist. And so the hairstylists need to remember that. What makes you successful is how well you do the thing that you're passionate about, not what you do necessarily.
Absolutely.
So
It seemed like for a time there, and maybe it's continuing, but especially in California, when we were shut down for so long, about 10 or 11 months total that we were shut down, a lot of clients were scrambling, desperate to get their roots touched up or their haircut or the whatever else they're doing in our industry. And it seemed like the appreciation was kicked up there for a minute. And maybe it still is. I know a lot of hairstylists are extremely busy right now, more so than before, but hopefully that improves.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a shocker for most people in the industry of just how needed hairstylists were.
Right.
So
totally. Yeah. Do you have any hair horror stories? It could be from school or a salon, or it could be something you've heard about if it's entertaining and educational enough.
I do have a horror story. It wasn't me personally, so I'll be gentle. But it was a stylist, a friend of mine. We worked in the salon together, and it makes me want to cry just thinking about it. But I was in the salon. Our salon owner was out traveling for work, so I was the manager on duty, I guess you could say. And a girl came in who had previously had her hair lightened. She had gotten a balayage, and it turned out perfect. She went through a very extremely thorough consultation. Beautiful. Came back in, a little bit later, months, whatever. And she came in just to have her lightened pieces brought up. So a retouch, there was no overlapping, same products, everything, and smoke. And her hair began to melt. And it turns out that she had recently gone in and gotten a keratin treatment and didn't divulge that information even through a very thorough consultation. But it was a very stressful situation. She actually called the authorities. She was very upset. They said, there's nothing we can do about this. You're not injured.
Right.
They're actually quite upset. But I still just feel, even talking about it today, I feel awful. The stylist is a total sweetheart, and she's actually probably one of the most successful hairstylists today that I know. Yeah. But, it happens. And it happens. It is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, you need to know what's going on with the hair before. And too many clients don't say anything, because
they may not know.
Right. Well, in some cases that's true. But that's a pretty common thing, unfortunately. So what was the outcome? Did she lose her hair? Did she have
She
to get
did.
a
She lost some.
short haircut?
No,
Bob, she went from a long balayage.
I think that was the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened afterwards, but yeah,
that's too
it
bad.
didn't go well.
Any last words for the community?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Go check me out on the Instagram.
Yeah,
Does that make me sound old on the gram? Of course it does.
Not at all. Not at all.
No. Follow me on Instagram. My goal with Instagram is not to make money and to monetize and make $1 billion. I just really love sharing things that people come to me and say, I have a hard time with this. I don't understand this. So I just like to take my knowledge, and if it helps you, it helps you, and I appreciate that.
Okay, like I said at the beginning of the episode, everybody should go to your gram, not because you want them as followers, but because you're delivering so much value through all these little clips, these little educational cutting clips. Get it? Clips? You are Carrie Loves EDU on the grams. Carrie, Carrie Loves EDU. So thank you so much for sharing everything. Really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun talking.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm going to clap you out.